Okay, since you're getting your first 3D printer soon, I wanted to get you started on how to make some models digitally from scratch. There are a lot of really neat things that you can find and download, but I think one of the really neat capabilities of this technology is to imagine something and then make it real. So in order to do that, I'm going to get you started in TinkerCAD, which is like the Microsoft Paint of CAD software. And when I say CAD, there's kind of two camps of 3D modeling. CAD stands for computer assisted drafting, and that's the sort of thing where you're really focused on like mechanical accuracy and dimensions and making sure that things are really, really accurate to how you modeled them. Whereas the other camp is poly modeling. So that's definitely more of an artistic approach where people are concerned with making really sophisticated surfaces and less so about, making sure the exact right size of hole is in the exact right size place. So we're going to be focusing on CAD. And I figured the thing that I would teach you to make today is this self-watering pot from Thingiverse. I know you were looking for something like this earlier, but this model was really too small for what you were looking for. So it's pretty simple and there's a lot of easy photos to look at. So I figured we would walk through recreating this in TinkerCAD. So this is the TinkerCAD suite, which you've seen before, and we're going to go ahead and just make a new design. So this is what you're greeted with when you start. This blue space is called the work plane, and that's kind of like the tabletop that you'll be placing your shapes on. TinkerCAD works by taking a bunch of primitives, which in 3D modeling is just very basic shapes, and adding and subtracting them. So if you go over here to the right, you'll see your whole library of shapes that you can add and subtract from. And it's pretty easy. You just drag and drop something onto your work plane. Now, I'll go over this real quick. Also, I'm just going to apologize. I have a mechanical keyboard and it is very loud. But anyway, you can simply drag and drop shapes and put them together. And if you want, you can use this button up here. This is called grouping, and you can combine them to make a new shape. Conversely, if we undo that, you can tell this shape that instead of adding the cylinders to cube, you want it to be a hole instead. And so if you group them, instead of, becoming part of this shape, it will cut out of it. And it's pretty simple, but that is the basis of how you will make anything and everything in TinkerCAD. So let's go ahead and start on the pot. I'm going to delete this. I am zooming with mouse scroll, and I'm right click and dragging to be able to rotate around my work plane. Now, just real quick, before we get started, you'll see that you've got a grid here, which we're going to be relying on a lot for making this. But this is a metric grid. So I'm going to go down here, edit grid, and instead of millimeters, I'm going to switch to inches. And then your printer bed has a dimension of 7 by 7 by 7 inches. So just to get an idea of how big this is going to be, we'll go ahead and change these guys to 7. They do have some presets, and these are all the names of different 3D printers, so we're just going to put yours in manually. So I'll update the grid, and now we have something that matches your printer. So when you're doing CAD, or any kind of modeling really, it's best to work from simple to complex. So if we take a look at this, we can actually break both of these parts down into something that's much more simple, and that's how we'll think about building it. So first, we're going to start with this pot. As you can see, it's a big cylinder stacked on top of this sort of upside down cone, and then on top of a smaller cylinder. And the whole thing is hollow, and it's got holes punched in it. And then it's got a kind of gap here for this chimney. And then the big pot is just a large cylinder, and the bottom has been rounded, and it's got this cylinder attachment. So if we think about this in basic shapes, we can start with the most essentials and then get more complicated in TinkerCAD. So let's start with this pot. On the bottom, we had a cylinder. So I'm just going to drag and drop a cylinder and just try to put it as close to the middle as possible. So this cylinder is going to be a little bit too small, and there are a number of different ways we can resize it. We can grab these dots on the side and make it bigger and bigger. And as you can see, when I'm doing that, you can see these numbers updating at the bottom here. And if I want to, I can take a shortcut and I can click this and then click the number and just type it in. So our bottom cylinder is going to be 2 inches by 2 inches and then 1.5 inches tall. Now, you might also notice that the side of the cylinder is really faceted, so you can just, see all these rectangles. And although that wouldn't really affect the function of our pot, it still kind of looks, not that good. So if we click on this, we can see this box come up, and it has all these different properties of this object. And down here, we can see this slider that says sides. So I can add a bunch of sides to it and make it look a lot smoother. I can also just click here and type my number if I want, and I'm just going to leave it at 60. So now we've got the bottom, just the very basic bottom part of our pot. Next, we are going to add this sort of upside down funnel piece. Now, if we click, we've got a cone over here. That's a good starting point. We'll just put one in here. If we go look at the properties, you'll see conveniently that you can actually, adjust the top and bottom radii separately, which is really useful. So I made this thing 2 inches wide. So on the bottom, the radius would be 1 inch. And then on the top, I've decided to make this pot 6 inches wide. So the radius would be 3 inches. And then this is pretty squat, so we can go ahead and let's try making it 2.5 inches tall. Okay. And then for some reason, not all shapes will let you edit those properties. Over here, you might have to just do it on the workspace. Like this one doesn't have radii or height or anything like that. So just kind of different based on the shape. Oh, and then let's make the sides 60 again, so it's nice and smooth. So when you want to move things in TinkerCAD, you can click and hold and drag them all around, and they're just going to move in 2 dimensions on this work plane. If you want to move them up, you can click this little arrow and drag up. And as I'm doing this, you might be able to see on the bottom right over here, this little number will change, and that'll tell me how high it is. So we know that this guy was 1.5 inches tall, so now this is 1.5 inches up in space, which is what we want. And now I'm just going to drag to align it and just kind of rotate all around and make sure it's lined up. And that looks good. So if we look at this pot, now we've got our cylinder, we've got our upside down cone, and now finally we need the top half, which is another cylinder. Now I could just drag a cylinder, put it on the work plane, make it the right size, and put it on top. And that would work okay because this is a simple shape. But if you're stacking a lot of things, that could get pretty annoying and is difficult to be precise. So what we can do is temporarily move this work plane somewhere else. And we can do that using the work plane tool. So if I click, and if I hover over anything, you see it kind of appears, and it can be on the side here, on the side of the cylinder. But if we click up on this flat surface, our work plane temporarily got put up here. So now, I can put all my new shapes up here, and they're just where I need them to be instead of starting from the floor. So we don't need either of these. We're just going to put our cylinder up here, kind of use that center dotted line and make sure it's in the middle, which it is. And then when we're all done with this temporary work plane, we can click it again, put it back on the floor. So now let's make this guy fit. One super neat trick for scaling is I could grab one of these at a time, but if I hold the Alt button before I click, it will make both sides scale at the same time. So this is another convenient way to resize. And then you can see right away, it's pretty chunky because we did not add our sides. Let's change that to 60. And then let's click and make this guy 3 inches tall. I think that's the height that we wanted. And oops, that is not aligned. That's a bizarre measurement. So let's make sure this is 6 and make sure this guy is 6 and just align it there. Okay, so now we have our stacked shapes. So like I said before, everything in TinkerCAD is made by either connecting shapes together or using one shape to cut out from another one. So in this case, I'm going to grab everything by doing a box select, which I just click and drag for that. And I'm going to click my group button. And now we've got the inner funnel, or the beginnings rather, of our funnel for our pot. And if you click on this button, you can change color. So I'm just going to make it blue so it's really obvious which part of this we're working on. But that is the very first step in making our self-watering planter in TinkerCAD.